Have you ever had the feeling that you had your money situation totally figured out, and then one day you realize maybe things aren't as rosy as you initially thought? If yes, don't worry, you're definitely not alone, and in this video, I'll be sharing with you the one thing that can ruin you financially. One financial phenomenon that is crippling many people's financial lives comes down to one simple word: inflation. Inflation is the decrease in the purchasing power of a given currency over time, or an increase in the general level of prices, usually expressed as a percentage. And it seems rather harmless to most people, but later in the video I'll share with you why it is crippling your finances every single day. But first, let's talk more about what inflation is and why it exists. While it is easy to measure the price changes of individual products over time, human needs go far beyond one or two such products. Individuals need a large and varied set of products, as well as a range of services to lead a comfortable life. These include commodities such as grain, fuel, metals, and utilities such as electricity, and then also transportation. Also, services such as health, labor, and entertainment are necessary. Inflation aims to measure the overall effect of price changes for a diversified set of products and services, and allows for a single value representation of the increase in the price level of goods and services in an economy over a given period of time. Moreover, there are multiple factors that can cause inflation in an economy. Usually, inflation results from an increase in the production cost or an increase in demand for products and services. I will detail other important factors in this video, but first, make sure that you smash the like button if you want to avoid the harmful effects of inflation yourself. So one primary cause of inflation is cost push inflation. This occurs when prices rise due to increases in production costs such as wages and raw materials. Although the demand for goods does not change, the supply of goods decreases due to high production costs. As a result, additional production costs are passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices for final products. Also, one of the signs of possible cost inflation can be seen in rising commodity prices such as oil and metals, as they are the main production inputs. For example, if the price of copper rises, companies that use copper to make their products may increase the prices of their goods. If the demand for the products is independent of the copper demand, the business will pass on their higher raw material cost to the consumers. The result is higher prices for consumers without any change in demand for the products consumed. Wages also affect the cost of production and are often the largest expense item for businesses. When the economy is performing well and the unemployment rate is low, labor or worker shortages can occur. Companies can also raise wages to attract qualified candidates, resulting in increased production costs for the company. Moving on, natural disasters can also raise prices. For example, if a hurricane destroys a crop of maize, prices may rise in the economy as maize is used in many products. And another form of inflation is demand pull inflation, which results from strong consumer demand for a product or service. When there's an increase in demand for a wide range of goods in an economy, their prices tend to increase. While this is generally not a concern for short-term supply and demand imbalances, sustained demand can resonate throughout the economy and increase costs for other goods. Consumer confidence tends to be high when unemployment is low and wages rise, leading to more spending. That more spending can lead to inflation. As the demand for a particular good or service increases, the available supply then decreases. When less product is available, consumers are willing to pay more to get the product, and this is just basic economics. Now, whether you realize it or not, companies play a major role in inflation, especially if they produce popular products. Big corporations with some form of monopoly like Apple come to mind. These companies may raise prices if consumers are willing to pay the increased amount. Companies also freely raise prices when the item for sale is something that consumers need for their daily lives. Also, the housing market is a factor in inflation. For example, the housing market has seen ups and downs over the years. If homes are in demand as the economy is experiencing an expansion, home prices will rise. Demand also affects the byproducts and services that support the housing industry. Construction projects such as timber and steel may become highly demanded due to the demands for homes. Furthermore, central banks can adopt an expansionary monetary policy which might lower interest rates. This is when central banks decide to reduce the cost of lending to banks, which allows banks to lend more to consumers and businesses. The increase in money available throughout the economy leads to more spending and demand for goods and services. Then, yet again, inflation can happen. So now you're well versed in how inflation works. So let's get personal and I'll explain how inflation erodes your wealth. As a currency depreciates, prices rise and your money buys fewer goods and services. This loss of purchasing power affects the general cost of living for the common man and ultimately leads to a slowdown in economic growth. The consensus among economists is that sustained inflation occurs when a nation's money supply growth outstrips economic growth. Inflation can occur in virtually any product or service, including needs-based expenditures such as food, housing, utilities, and medical care, just as in necessities such as cosmetics, jewelry, and automobiles. When inflation becomes rampant in an economy, the prospect of further inflation becomes a paramount concern in the consciousness of consumers and businesses. No, we cannot avoid every disaster that will cost us a penny. Job loss, a medical emergency you can't afford, a destroyed car, a flooded house, these happen to people every day. Fortunately, we can minimize the risk of financial ruin by not stacking the deck against ourselves. Central banks of advanced economies generally monitor inflation. For example, the US Federal Reserve has an inflation target of around 2% and adjusts monetary policy to combat inflation if prices rise too much or too quickly. Inflation can be a cause for concern because it makes money saved today less valuable tomorrow. Inflation erodes the consumer's purchasing power and can even affect their ability to retire. For example, if an investor earns 5% on stocks and bonds and the inflation rate is 3%, the investor only earns 2% in real terms. Up until this point in the video, I know inflation is seeming to be unavoidable in your journey to get rich, but don't worry, because in a minute I will tell you how to best combat this financial foe, so keep watching. Now, however, while consumer benefits little from inflation, investors can enjoy an increase if they hold assets in inflation-affected markets. For instance, those who invest in energy companies may see a rise in stock prices if energy prices are rising. Some companies reap the fruits of inflation with no regard to the masses. They can charge more for their products as a result of increased demand for their goods. If the economy is performing well and demand for housing is high, home builders may charge higher prices to sell homes. Inasmuch as everyone knows the negative aspects of inflation, greed among businessmen causes them to indulge in shady dealings. Inflation can provide businesses with pricing power and increased profit margins. If profit margins are rising, it means that the prices companies charge for their products are increasing faster than the increase in production costs. More so, some business owners may deliberately withhold goods from the market and allow prices to rise to an appropriate level. On the whole, companies can suffer from inflation if it is a result of an increase in production costs. Companies are at risk if they cannot pass a higher cost to consumers through higher prices. To combat this, the appropriate monetary authority, such as a company's central bank, takes the necessary measures to manage the supply of money and credit to keep inflation within permissible limits and keep the economy running smoothly. So how do we fight inflation? Theoretically, monetarism is a popular theory that explains the relationship between an economy's inflation and the money supply. For example, after the Spanish conquest of the Inca and Aztec empires, large amounts of gold and silver flowed into the Spanish and other European economies. As the money supply increased rapidly, the value of money fell, contributing to the rapid rise in prices. Thus, you can see that inflation happens and is measured in various ways depending on the types of goods and services handled. Now that we know the causes, stick around as I delve into the ways to fight inflation in this video. One way you can fight inflation is by investing in stocks. Despite the lack of confidence that most people express about stocks, owning some stocks can be a very good way to fight inflation. Think of your home as a business. If a company can't properly invest its money in projects that will generate returns above cost, it will also fall victim to inflation. The fundamental premise of business success is that companies will sell their wares at increasing prices, which will lead to higher revenues, earnings, and inevitably stock prices. Some of the best stocks to own during inflation will be in companies that naturally increase their prices during periods of inflation. Commodity sourcing companies are an example. Products such as oil, grains, and metals enjoy pricing power during times of inflation. Prices for these items tend to rise, unlike, for example, the price of a computer that is subject to manufacturer and distributor price adjustments. Still, price increases are not enough to hedge inflation. If a company faces increased expenses, price increases alone are not enough to sustain equity valuation. For this reason, markets that can benefit from the increase in food prices can also suffer from the increase in the cost of goods sold. Look into investing in businesses that have the strongest profit margins and often the lowest cost of production, such as commodity firms or healthcare companies. Finally, never underestimate the value of dividends during periods of inflation. Dividends increase a portfolio's overall return. Another way to stay afloat during inflation is to invest in a home. Real estate is always a good investment when done right. This is good insurance against inflation because most of the time their producers can pass down the high cost to the final consumer. While experienced real estate investors can find hidden values in properties, the average person should focus on buying a home with the intention of holding it, even for a few years. Real estate investments often do not yield returns within a few months or weeks. A long waiting time is required for the values to increase. So, if you take a fixed rate mortgage, you pay off your future debt in cheaper currency if rates go up. But if rates go down, you're still responsible for the fixed amount. And several factors must be considered to choose the best mortgage option. Like land, home prices tend to increase in value on average from year to year. And it's true that real estate bubbles are often followed by periods of correction, sometimes causing homes to lose more than half of their value. Still, on average, house prices tend to increase over time, offsetting the effects of inflation. Moreover, investing in yourself remains the best investment, hence, it's only reasonable that it can help combat inflation too. The best investment you can make to prepare for an uncertain financial future is an investment in yourself. Simply put, you need to make yourself more valuable and increase your future earning power. So how is this done? Allow me to elaborate. This investment starts with quality education and continues with keeping skills up to date and learning new skills that will match those most needed in the not too distant future. Being able to keep up with the changing needs of a business not only protects your salary against inflation, it also protects your career against recession. In conclusion, it's a waste of time to pray or hope inflation never happens, but you can take steps to position yourself properly, and the best way to do that is by investing. Hey, it looks like YouTube thinks this next video is the one that will change your financial life forever. Give it a watch and let's see if they're right.